Hey guys, welcome to a tutorial on how to randomly spawn enemies, Call of Duty zombie style. This tutorial is not going to teach you how to make the enemies that have artificial intelligence and come after the player. That was the last tutorial that we did, entitled Nav Meshes and Enemy AI. Go and have a look at that, and this lesson is basically a follow-on from there. Now, if you just want items to randomly appear around your game, then you can just follow this lesson. But if you do want them to be enemies with AI, as I say, go and look at the last one. So what have I created? The green cube is our main player. The red cube is the enemy. The enemy basically chases after the green main player. When we hide behind things, it will try and find the shortest route to come and get me. So you can see that it's changing direction there on its own. What we want to be able to do is randomly spawn these around our scene. Right, to do that, it's a little bit like creating bullets if you've done the projectiles tutorial. We can't have the enemy in this state. We have to go down here to these sections and go into a different state and put the enemy here. Now, because we've already built in, we can actually move items between states by clicking on them, pressing the M for mic key, and then choosing the new state that you want it to go to. So it's disappeared from here, and as you can see down here, if we click over, we've now got our enemy over here. He's still got all of the programming inside it that will make it follow this player as soon as it hits this nav mesh. What we want to do then, guys, is we want to make an invisible object move around the scene on like a timer, and every, I don't know, say 3, 4, 5 seconds, it just adds a new enemy, falls down to the ground, and then it starts to seek our player. So for you guys, your version of Blender up here, you will go to the word add, and you'll come down to the word empty, and you'll select a plane axis. For me, I just need to go on create and come down all the way to the word empty, and it adds this thing, which is basically just a coordinate in 3D space. It's completely invisible, it doesn't do anything. However, as an object, we're going to go over, and instead of empty, we're going to call it spawn AI enemy. So we know what it does. Right, the next thing we need to do is we need to make sure that it's actually going to go around our level like we want it to do, and obviously in order to do that we need to animate it. Now, because it's going to take a set path every single time, we can just use a traditional static animation using the normal timeline editor. So go into the timeline editor, we must set this to lock rot scale. What I'm going to do is on frame 0, I'm going to leave it exactly where it is in the corner there. Make sure it's over the nav mesh so that the enemy will hit the nav mesh. That looks pretty good to me. Maybe lower it down a little bit more, and I'm going to set a keyframe. Then I'm going to go all the way to the end to frame 250, and I'm going to set another keyframe because this is where I want the empty to end up. So coming back to down here, I'm going to go to frame 50, and I'm going to move it along and set a keyframe. I'm then going to go to frame 80 and move it this way and set a keyframe, and basically so on and so on. So I'm just going to keep going around my scene. Wait, I didn't move it then. Keep going around the scene, basically just adding different keyframes, making sure that each time it's actually going to be adding it to the right place. So as you can see, that's sort of moving down there like that. Let's have a look whether that sort of works. Which direction does it take? It goes in between them. So what we don't want is for it to be hitting walls or landing on this grey area here, because that's going to confuse the enemy in terms of its AI, because it's not going to be able to operate on the nav mesh. So that sort of goes around the corner nicely. Obviously, I've done this really quickly. We could make it go behind here, go all over the place. But if I put that back to 0 now and press play, I can see that this invisible object is going to move around my scene at different speeds, and it is going to spawn the enemy into different places if we allow it to. So the first thing we need to do is put our timeline back to 0 and actually get this thing moving constantly around our scene, remembering that we've animated it over 250 frames. So back to the logic editor, and I want it to always animate, and it's going to loop the end, so it's going to keep going. We've only done one animation, so spawn enemy AI action. Another reason why we need to name it beforehand. Frame 250. And we're just going to join that together. Now, unfortunately, because it's an invisible object, if we click P for play, we can't actually see it moving around. So we're just going to have to trust that it is moving. And obviously, if our enemies keep spawning in the same spot, then we know that there's a problem. So what else do we want it to do? We also want it to add. So let's go to Edit Object. And we're going to add an object. And we are going to add... What did we call our enemy? Let's have a look. We called him Bad Guy 001. So going back in the scene, select this again. And he was called Bad Guy 001. Make sure we get that right. How frequently do we want to do that then? Well, if we use an always sensor, it's just going to do it once. However, if we use something called a delay, this works as a timer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a delay, I'm going to wire it in, and I'm going to set a delay of 60 frames. What that's going to do is after 60 frames has gone, it's going to add the object. However, by clicking the repeat button, it will then go back to 0 and count up for another 60 frames. Let's see if that works. So as you can see, it's randomly spawning enemies, and because they've got the nav mesh information in them in terms of their programming, they're actually following my character and chasing my character around. Pretty soon I'm going to have to start jumping if I want to get away from them being attacked here. So awesomeness rating. Got to be a few million. Look at this bad boy. I've got loads and loads of enemies spawning. Now, we can try and control this by putting some sort of a limit on it so that every time it adds an enemy, perhaps it adds one onto a property, and if we get 50 enemies, it won't add any more enemies, but then as you start to shoot them, that number will go down, and so it will keep adding more and more enemies, because as you can see, this is getting a little bit ridiculous. It can be really, really interesting. This type of enemy sort of spawning is really for survival games where you have one large level, a level much larger than this, and you just start spawning the enemies as frequently as you see fit. However, it's maybe not the best way to go about having enemies in a video game. So if you want to have a few random enemies that will start chasing after you in different zones, so as you approach different zones, we're going to look at how to do that in the next tutorial. This is getting crazy. Right guys, I'm off.